On February 19, 1962, in the basement of the McDowell County Courthouse, a low-level maintenance worker named Ellis Marlin pried open a sealed metal filing cabinet marked only with a strip of yellowing tape. Do not catalogue. He hadn't meant to find anything. He was there to clear mold from the foundation wall after weeks of heavy rain. But the cabinet sat flush against the concrete, and the wall behind it was slick with rot. When Ellis moved it, the rusted lock gave way, and something inside shifted. It wasn't files stacked like others in the basement. It was a single manila folder, water-warped heavy, as if something had bled into it. Over the years, inside were 3 photographs. One of a cabin fire, the frame still smouldering, pine wood, timbers bowed in collapse. The second, a handwritten birth record, no surname, just child born of Sarah, age unknown, and a scrawled date, October 3rd, 1936. The third was a letter, faded ink, signed Eleanor Finch, county educator. It was dated April 1937, addressed to the West Virginia Department of Public Welfare. The letter read, "If the state does not intervene, another child will die. I have reported what I could, but no one listens. They believe the hollow watches itself. That file never made it into the archive. There's no record of the child's birth in any county index. No death certificate. No census listing for Sarah, surname unknown." Eleanor Finch was suspended from her post 2 months after the letter was written. Official cause, mental fatigue. Her body was found 3 years later in Virginia, disoriented, without shoes, according to official property and tax records. No family resided on Burnt Hollow Ridge between 1920 and 1960. But if you trace old land surveys, the ones mapped before the Appalachian Highway Commission deemed the area unfit for development, you'll find Burnt Hollow marked faintly in charcoal ink, nestled between Iron Lick Creek and a no longer existent wagon trail. It's the kind of place that stopped being mentioned in travel books after the railroads pulled out. The kind of place the birds don't even fly over now, but maps forget. Stories don't. In a 1971 interview for an oral history project at Concord College, 83-year-old Lena Hartsfield, once a midwife in Welch, was asked about the hollows that had gone dark. She answered without hesitation, "Oh, Burnt Hollow. That was never dark. That place glowed. You could see it shine at night, like someone was burning pine tar from the trees. But it wasn't tar, wasn't fire neither. I caught one of their babies once, didn't cry. Not once, looked at me with a grown man's eyes." The recording ends with silence. Not even a thank you, just a hard cut. That segment of the interview wasn't transcribed in the public archive until 2003, and only because a graduate student flagged the phrase, "grown man's eyes," during a folklore review. So who were they? The family without names, the mother without an age, the child born without a cry. Local law. The kind passed over porches and through quilt circles, says there were those in the hollow who didn't bury their dead the way others did, that the earth was soft there, that they returned things to it before they were finished being born. One story tells of a bell that rang only when a baby cried, and if it rang, they'd take the child into the trees and teach it silence again. But folklore is easy to dismiss. Paperwork, less so, because in a 1940 death inventory filed under County Coroner Wilkes logs, entry number 43 states, "Female body recovered from spring near Burnt Hollow, approximately 24 years. distended abdomen, no ID, entire tongue removed, clean cut, teeth marked with ash, deemed suicide, though knife not found. Again, no name, no follow-up, no photograph. But this next part. This part was never meant to be public. In 1981, a declassified memo was released under the Freedom of Information Act. It was from the West Virginia Department of Social Services. Internal Communication number D92A. The subject line read, repeated, false reports from McDowell County concerning non-existent families, request to suppress folklore and unauthorized field investigations. It instructed agents to cease acknowledgement of any reports relating to Burnt Hollow, Iron Lick Creek, or the so-called Ridge Orphans. The note concluded, these cases are considered closed due to lack of verifiable identities. Further, attention may legitimize community hysteria. Let that sit with you for a second. A government memo, real, traceable, that uses the word hysteria instead of investigation, that treats mothers without surnames as superstition, that labels the record of a dead woman with ash on her teeth as a false report. What kind of truth can rot that far down and still leave its stain? Because here's the thing. If you go to McDowell County today, the courthouse basement looks different. Most of the files have been moved. The cabinet in question, lost during renovations in 1993. No one knows where the file went. But one of the janitors, a man named Stephen Riley, who retired in 2002, told a reporter off the record that he remembered a folder no one was allowed to look at, said it smelled like wet wool and burnt sage, said a lawyer once came looking for it, said it was tied to an estate no one wanted to inherit. And then there's this. Every 5 or 10 years, someone wanders into a local clinic or sheriff's office near Iron Lick Creek, always barefoot, always mumbling, sometimes young, sometimes old. One woman in 1998 said she escaped the cradle room. Another man in 2005 said he walked the Black Trail 3 times and still hears the hymn. Most are committed, none are traced. If this were madness, it would be ordinary. But madness doesn't pass through land deeds. It doesn't repeat names across documents that never should have touched. Madness doesn't hum in the same key. And to this day, to this moment, Burnt Hollow Ridge remains a place of silence. Not in metaphor, in fact, birds do not nest there. No rustling, no buzzing. Just the sound of your own breath catching in the trees, like something waiting to hear if you'll say its name. There are stories carved in the beams of barns long since collapsed. There are names whispered at church potlucks but never written. In the guest book, there are birth records with no surnames. There are census gaps. There are songs only the soil still remembers, and we're just beginning to unearth what they tried to bury beneath bureaucracy, beneath faith, beneath fire. So if your kin ever warned you about the hills past Iron Lick Creek, if your family tree has a broken branch labeled only infant girl, unknown cause, if you've ever heard the hymn of silence where no birds fly and no bells ring, then write it. Tell us what was left out of the file and subscribe, because every story you share helps open another cabinet they tried to seal shut. And some stories were never meant to stay forgotten. The land between McDowell County, West Virginia, and Harlan County, Kentucky, is not charted in any way that matters. A stretch of green-brown silence tucked behind collapsed coal veins and ghost rail lines, where no GPS signal holds and no state. Road signs are posted. They call it the Ridge Border, but that's not its name, just what's left after the maps gave up trying. According to an 1899 Geological Survey archived in the West Virginia Geological and Economic Report, Burnt Hollow. Ridge was marked as uninhabitable for rail or agriculture, slope too unstable, soil too acidic. And yet, handwritten notes in the margins of that same report mention clearing smoke from 3 cabins, a graveyard with standing stones, and one woman waving from the tree line, refused interview. That's the first and last official government record of Burnt Hollow until 1928. After that, silence until the collapse in October 1929. The collapse of the Hightree mine in McDowell triggered a chain reaction. Dozens of jobs lost, the rail spur halted, and the federal aid that was promised to build a connecting road to Harlan County was rerouted to a flood relief effort upstate. The town that never really became a town, the Ridge community, unofficial, unincorporated, was left behind. Its only path, a wagon road along the eastern creek, washed out in the spring thaw of 1930 when the state dammed a tributary to create Lake Fern. The water didn't just take the road, it took the boundary. What remained was something unpinned, a place without a county, a valley with no law, somewhere you could live without being found, or be born without being counted. And many did, but, even among locals, the Ridge was an unspoken place. In the 1933 edition of the Pine Fork Ledger, an anonymous editorial titled "The People the Road Forgot" included this line: "There are fires up past, iron lick that never dim. Children who walk to the edge of the woods to watch, but are told not to cross, because on the ridge the graves don't stay where you dig them." That same year, the county attempted a second census of the region after the Federal Bureau of Records flagged 6 unverified birth notices sent from an unnamed midwife in the Iron Lick area. Those forms, scrawled in pencil and stained with what appears to be birthing fluid, listed infants by first name only. No surnames, no paternal information, all delivered by M.H., presumed to mean mountain healer. The census workers assigned to the area, Charles Lemley and Josephine Grant, never submitted their documentation. Their employer, Emery Lambert, wrote in a resignation letter dated June 14, 1934. They went up the trail. I waited 5 hours. Came back down alone. Never saw either again. I don't believe the ridge is fit for government eyes. Their names appear nowhere else, not even on state payroll rosters from that year. And then there's the soil itself. An agricultural report from 1942 noted anomalous decomposition patterns in the ridge's forest floor. Animals buried there, including test pigs, decomposed in weeks rather than months. Soil samples showed high acidity, but also elevated iron and sulfur levels, inconsistent with the surrounding region. A margin note from the anonymous field biologist simply reads, "Like the ground is always hungry." The land wanted to forget, but not everything let it. In 1957, a team of amateur spelunkers mapping uncharted caves near the Kentucky border stumbled across a shallow shaft about 5 miles south of Burnt Hollow. They documented carvings on the cave walls, dozens of X-shapes, stacked vertically like tally marks. Near the back of the shaft, they discovered a sealed box, wood, hand-latched, coated in what was later identified as sheep, fat, and ash. Inside were clippings, strands of hair, dried umbilical cords, buttons from infant gowns. One note, in cursive to faded to confirm but decipherable enough, read, "The ridge keeps what's born in silence." No official investigation followed. The spelunkers sold the box to a collector in Louisville. That collector, Andrew Cale, died by self-inflicted injuries 4 months later. His estate auction listed the box as folk medicine kit, Appalachian origin. It has not been recovered, so why wasn't this place ever marked? Why, despite dozens of strange incidents, from missing census takers to anonymous birth records to grave markers with only first names, did no state agency ever register Burnt Hollow as inhabited? The answer lies in a now declassified memo from the 1964 Appalachian Regional Commission, document number ARC-172B. It is advised to allow the ridge border area between McDowell and Harlan counties to remain undocumented. Previous efforts to establish community ties have resulted in bureaucratic confusion, missing personnel, and inflammatory local response. Residents, if any, are considered culturally distinct and should not be disturbed. The phrase culturally distinct appears 8 times in the memo. So does volatile terrain and no value for infrastructure investment. The file ends with a chilling note. Under recommendations, allow isolation to persist. If the residents remain unclaimed, so too should the land. But some records, like rot, refuse to stay buried. In a 1972 McDowell County Utility Project report, engineers clearing brush for potential telephone lines uncovered an old roadstone etched with a single word, Ashland. There are no living families by that name in the county today, but a review of McDowell property tax records from 1918 lists an E. Ashland as owner of a cabin on the Hollow Bend. The payment status is marked cleared, but the line for property condition reads only uninhabitable, child echo. That's not a real estate designation. It doesn't appear anywhere else in the ledger. And then, of course, there are the stories. In 1989, a pair of students from the University of Kentucky recorded oral histories from aging miners in Harlan County. One man, known only as Old Thomas, described a hollow past where the air smells wrong. He said his father once hunted there and came back changed. Not wounded, not ill, just silent. He stopped saying our names, said we didn't have the right ones anymore. In that same interview, Thomas mentioned that some nights the wind would blow from the ridge and you'd hear the trees cry. Like children, but not in pain, in hunger. Those tapes were archived but never published. One of the students, Ann Miller, died in a car crash the following spring. Her co-researcher moved to Oregon and refused to speak on the project again. Her final thesis, titled Boundary of the Forgotten. So what was the ridge? Not a town, not a settlement, not even a proper ghost story. It was the space between, a place whose coordinates never locked in because the people there didn't want to be found. Or maybe they weren't people in the way the rest of us understand. Maybe they belonged to something older, a structure of belief not written in church ledgers or county deeds, but passed through blood, silence, and soil. And maybe the greatest trick the ridge ever pulled wasn't hiding from maps. It was teaching us to stop looking, because if no one remembers the town, then nothing bad ever happened there. And if nothing bad ever happened, there's no one left to blame but silence. Doesn't mean safety, it means obedience. And to this day, if you stand where the road to Burnt Hollow should have been, just past Iron Lick Creek, where the moss grows too thick and the air turns cold, in summer you might feel something watching. You won't see it, you won't hear it, but you will feel it. The ridge was never abandoned, it was waiting. If your family once spoke of a place between counties, if someone in your tree was born with no hospital record, no last name, no baptism, if you've ever dreamed of a valley where no sound echoes and the air smells like rusted milk, write it below. Tell us what your family, WOULDN, single quotes, and subscribe, because every story you share seals another name back into the record. And some names were never meant to vanish. The Harrell family name should be nothing more than a footnote in West Virginia's earliest census pages, just another Appalachian surname like Pritchard or Mullins or Cantwell, names that grew from coal and floodwater and old hymns with no author. But the Harrells weren't miners. They didn't live in company towns. And by 1930, they weren't on any census at all. But they were there. Property tax ledgers from 1927 list a single structure at parcel #119B on Burnt Hollow Ridge. Occupied dwelling. Condition, unstable. Assessed to R. Harrell. That's it. No first name. No initials attached to the R. The payment line shows paid in full. But the receipt ID is left blank. An anomaly flagged in to audit reports, both of which were mysteriously lost in a 1953 file room fire at the McDowell County Assessor's Office. A cabin with no visible owner, a surname without a person, a payment no one remembers accepting. What's more disturbing is what came after. In a 1931 police log from neighboring Buchanan County, Virginia, to 27 miles east of Burnt Hollow, a miner named Lyle Harrell was listed as a county ward following an arrest for vagrancy and unlicensed herbal sales. He was 12, couldn't read, couldn't write, but reportedly told the deputy, "I don't got a birthday, just a return day. Mama said I come back different." The boy was committed to a state orphanage under the condition that no next of kin could be identified. He disappeared from the orphanage 3 months later during a fire. The building's south wing collapsed. No remains were recovered. Lyle was never seen again. The fire never investigated. From there, the surname scatters like ash through court logs, birth notices, and psychiatric intake forms, always fragmentary, always barely out of reach. A Sister Harrell is mentioned in a 1934 asylum report from the Tazewell Women's Infirmary. The attending physician describes her as mute by choice, devout to a forgotten religion. No first name, no known relatives. Admitted after attempting to baptize a stillborn goat at a public well in 1937. A death certificate was filed in Pike County for an infant girl, Harrell, born and deceased on the same day. The form is incomplete. The mother's line reads, "Only Sarah, age unknown." The attending physician's note reads, "Stillbirth, body malformed, spine arched backward, eyes open at birth." But there's no burial record, no funeral notice, just a clerk's note in the margin. Mother declined name, claimed child wasn't hers, just kept in her for a time. These are not ordinary documents. They exist like rips in the fabric of official history, small, unsettling, impossible to stitch back together. They suggest a family, yes, but not a family that wanted to be known. A lineage bent not toward survival, but removal. Not privacy, erasure. Folklorists call this willful dissociation, the cultural act of detaching identity from the written world. But in Burnt Hollow, it wasn't culture. It was belief. A belief that names carried weight. That documentation drew attention, that the state was not a protector, but an observer, and that eyes from above should never find what lived beneath. The Ridge, in 1945, a traveling preacher named Edwin Lightwood attempted to set up a revival tent near Iron Lick Creek. He lasted 2 nights. In a journal later found in the back seat of his abandoned car, he wrote, "There was a family that came, each night, but not together. They entered in silence. No greetings, no amen. The child stared without blinking. The mother had a ring of ash painted on her forehead. The father, if he was the father, never moved. He never held the revival, left his ministry, moved to Michigan. The final entry in his journal simply reads, "They were born wrong, but worshipped right." Who were the Harrells? A family without marriage records, without church affiliations, without graves. Even more unsettling are the mimics families from nearby hollows with similar names and missing documents. A Harrell family in Letcher County with 4 stillbirths in 5 years. A Harold listed in a 1922 coal registry. No address, no wage history. Terminated for excessive silence and odd effect on other workers. Odd effect. What kind of man unnerves a coal foreman? Then there's the 1956 psychiatric case of a young woman named Mina Harrell, again no relation confirmed, who was admitted to the Western State Hospital after being found wandering in the snow near Logan County. She wore a christening gown and spoke only in rhyme. Repeated the same sentence to nurses for days. "My name's not mine. It was borrowed from the trees." Doctors considered it a psychotic break, prescribed electroshock therapy. But what caught the eye of Dr. Lena McNeil, a newly appointed intern, was Mina's blood type, AB negative. Rare but not impossible. What was impossible? According to her records, she was born with no fingerprints, none. Her skin, when pressed into ink, showed no ridges, just smoothness like new wax. The nurse who recorded her intake quit the following week. His resignation letter read, "I cannot care for those who were not born of this earth." Filed under emotional instability, ignored ever since. The Harrells didn't leave traces in the way other families did. No birthright claims, no family plots, no handwritten wills or newspaper obituaries, and yet they appear just enough to know they were a ghostly ledger of moments that don't line up, don't resolve, not vanishings, but deliberate unbecomings, because maybe it wasn't about being remembered. Maybe it was about staying unfound. There's a story passed through midwives in the area, barely more than a whisper, that the Harrells never named their children until the 7th year, that the naming was a ritual done in a clearing at dusk, with one witness and no candles, that the name wasn't a gift but a test. If the child spoke it back, they stayed. If not, they were returned to the land. Returned, not buried, returned. The Harrells believed that the land chose who lived on it, that some children came from the ridge, but not all should remain. And perhaps this is why, even now, locals flinch when asked about the name. Perhaps this is why, in 1979, a state genealogist named Erin McPherson attempted to trace the Harrell line and vanished 2 weeks later. Her last known correspondence, mailed from a motel in Ward WV, included a family tree marked with a red slash across one name. Rona Harrell, birth unknown, death undecided. Decades later, that same name would appear in the same handwriting, on a missing persons form in Ashe County, North Carolina. Same signature, same red ink, but dated 2008. How can a woman with no verified birth date file reports across 70 years, unless she wasn't ever born in the way the rest of us are? Unless the Harrells kept returning. If this sounds like myth, it should. But myths are just truths that someone found too dangerous to say plainly. And the more we try to find the Harrells, the more the records resist. Forms vanish, witnesses recant, files mold, burn, or are marked sealed by family request, even when no family exists to do the sealing. Because that's the final trick. You cannot erase what was never written, and you cannot kill what refuses to be named. So if your family once spoke of children without cry, if your great-grandmother feared a surname you were never told, if your genealogy has a blank where one branch should be, tell us, write it below, and subscribe, because every comment is another thread pulled from the knot they left behind. And if they hid one family this well, ask yourself, how many others did they forget on purpose? Because some lineages were born in silence, and silence doesn't bury anything, it just waits. In 1985, restoration volunteers began clearing brush around the abandoned Ironlick Chapel, a long deconsecrated structure that once served as the only place of worship within reach of Burnt Hollow Ridge. The church hadn't held a service since 1949. The roof sagged. The bell was missing. Ivy clung to the wood-like veins on pale skin. But beneath the pulpit, under a rotted trapdoor sealed with 5 rusted nails and a layer of hardened wax, they found something never meant to be. A narrow crawl space. Dry, even in spring. The air held a bitter smell, not decay, not mildew, but something like dried milk and sulfur. Inside were shelves carved directly into the earth, each holding carefully wrapped bundles, swaddling cloths stiff with time, hand-copied Bibles, with passages scratched out in red wax, and a cradle hand-carved from dark pine, hollowed at the center, with initials burnt into its base, SH, and next to it, an old flour sack. Inside, labeled and tied with twine, 9 infant teeth, each marked with a year, the earliest, 1922, the latest, 1938. No official report was filed. The volunteers sealed the crawlspace. Local law enforcement dismissed it as historical detritus. But one of the workers, a student named Tara Voss, took photos before they boarded it up. 3 months later, she sent the photos to a folklore researcher at the University of Charleston. That researcher, Thomas Delvin, compiled a private dossier titled The Doctrine of the Hollow-Born. It was never published, but a leaked excerpt reads, "The Harrow lineage, or what poses as such, practiced a rite that replaced traditional baptism. Infants were not named at birth. Instead, they were kept in silence for 7 years. If they cried before the 7th spring, their names were burned. If they stayed silent, they were named and offered to the light. The light, in this context, may not refer to God as commonly understood." He continues, "Several handwritten psalms found in the Ironlick crawlspace appear to be rewritten versions of Ecclesiastes and Proverbs, but altered. The word God is replaced with root or below, and judgment is not given from above, but upward from beneath the cradle. That cradle, with the initials SH, is believed to have belonged to Sarah Harrell, whose name appears in one solitary birth notice from 1936, but nowhere else. If true, it would make the object the only physical trace of the matriarch who bore a child born malformed, eyes open at birth." But Ironlick Chapel was not always a place of strange worship. Before 1908, it was simply known as Hollow Grace Baptist, a one-room prayer hall for scattered farm families and miners. Wives. Then the split happened. An unsigned letter, published in the McDowell Mountain Press in September 1909, warns of new doctrine infecting the flock and rituals done in candlelight, far past the hour of grace. The article was dismissed as rumor, but later that winter, 4 families left the area. Their names appear once more in town ledgers, all requesting property transfers to unknown buyers. One note reads, "Refuse to live near the hollow folk. Their babies do not cry. Their faith is not ours." This was not theological debate. This was fear. Inside the hidden shelves beneath iron-licked scripture pages were nailed to the walls with human hair. Entire pages from Genesis were rewritten. The creation myth altered to begin not with light, but with soil. And the soil opened its mouth and gave forth the child, unformed and waiting, and the child was named by silence. And only when silence held did the root accept them. On the far wall, scratched in soot, a simple phrase repeats, "Do not name what bleeds before spring." To name something too early, it seems, was considered dangerous, a spiritual affront, an invitation to sickness, death, or worse, attention. A 1932 report from the West Virginia Board of Child Welfare makes a passing mention of non-compliant spiritual midwives in the Iron Lick area. It describes an oral-only rite conducted after sunset involving 7 stones, salt water, and a naming bowl filled with milk. No follow-up investigation was conducted, because no one wanted to interfere, because interference meant responsibility. Even so, scattered testimonials hint at something deeper than ritual, something that straddled the line between religion and survival. In 1946, a young teacher named Miriam Cleghorn was assigned to a one-room schoolhouse in Hensley, the closest functioning school to the Burnt Hollow region. Her journals, archived after her death, include the following entry dated November 2nd. "A new boy started today. Quiet, never raises his hand. He has no name on his enrollment form. His mother signed with an X when I asked her for a surname. She just said, 'He's not old enough for that.'" 3 weeks later, Miriam notes, "The boy stares at the tree line. Always the same spot. I caught him drawing a symbol over and over, 3 roots spiraling inward. When I asked him what it was, he whispered, 'That's how they come back.' No school discipline record exists. No child by that description appears in county enrollment logs. Miriam transferred schools in January, cited unexplained health issues and difficulty sleeping. She never married. Her obituary reads, 'Beloved teacher, lived quietly, died without family.'" The rituals of the Hollow weren't designed to keep something out. They were meant to hold something in, and perhaps that's the most terrifying part. The idea that these beliefs weren't madness or folklore, but systems, passed intentionally, hidden not out of shame, but purpose, to avoid the eyes of the state, to confuse the paper trails, to protect whatever rooted them to that place. In 1970, an anonymous source mailed a package to the Pike County Historical Society. Inside, a hand-bound hymnal titled Songs for the Unspoken. All lyrics were written phonetically, as if transcribed from memory. The melodies couldn't be deciphered, but one stood out. "Hold the child in cradle tight, wrap in silence, not in white. Say no name till son's 3rd kiss, lest the root wake up amiss." There were no other documents in the package, no return address, just a charcoal drawing tucked between the pages. A child in a crib, faceless, surrounded by hands with no arms. The hymn book was placed in the archives. It disappeared during renovations in 1983. None of this was written down in town histories, no plaques, no local legends, because even now, some of the older families remember what those rites meant. They remember what happened to children who spoke too soon, or cried too loud, or were named too early, before the Hollow had accepted them. It wasn't just that these families believed something different. It's that they believed their children didn't belong to them until the Hollow said so. Until the root claimed them. And so they waited. In silence. In secrecy. In soil. If your grandmother ever refused to name a baby before its first birthday, if there's a photo in your attic with a child whose face has been scratched out, if you've heard lullabies with no melody, just hums, low and deep, like something rising from the dirt, tell us, leave it below, and subscribe. Because every forgotten hymn you remember is another verse they tried to bury, and some lullabies were never meant to be sung aloud. The Hollow kept its silence longer than any outsider expected. For decades, it existed just below the line of notice, too rural for reporters, too fragmented for census takers, too steep for preachers to climb, until one child did something that couldn't be ignored. Her name was Elsie Greer. According to the Pikeville Courier, on February 11th, 1937, a schoolteacher named Eleanor Finch filed an emergency report with the county superintendent. Her letter, yellowed but intact in the county archive, reads as follows: "There is a girl in my class. She is 7, but cannot speak, not from defect, but from training. She stares through the window every hour, draws the same shape, over and over, a triangle with roots coming out from the bottom. I have tried to engage her, but today she told me, very calmly, I was not supposed to speak yet. The naming was not done right." The girl, Elsie, was registered without a birth certificate, no vaccination records, no prior school history. Her guardian's name on the enrollment form was simply Sarah H. No address, no phone number, just a scrawled note, "We will collect." Her after planting, Finch's report triggered concern. The board responded with a request for home visitation. But when the county sent 2 workers up the old mining trail near Burnt Hollow, they returned empty-handed. No house, no woman, number, sign of a girl ever living there. But the child came to school every morning. She never arrived by road. No one saw her walk in. She would be at her desk, silent, staring. Then one day, she was gone. On March 2nd, 1937, Eleanor Finch entered the schoolhouse early and found a small bundle on the front steps, a strip of flannel cloth, folded like a swaddle, inside a child's drawing. Crude, but unmistakable. It was a house, but not like any house Finch knew. The windows were blacked out. The chimney curved unnaturally like a spine. A single figure stood in front. No face, just a triangle drawn over the head. Beneath the figure, a line written in shaky cursive. "I came back wrong. They put me back." Eleanor turned the drawing over and found one of Elsie's baby, teeth taped to the back with pine sap. The schoolhouse shuddered that week. The official explanation, whether damage to the roof, but Eleanor's resignation letter, kept in the personal collection of her surviving niece, tells a different story. It wasn't the roof, it was the humming, the kind that fills a room when something ancient moves. I believe the girl was not alone in herself. I believe her words were not hers. Elsie Greer's name was never officially recorded in the district. The drawing, the tooth, the cloth, all vanished in later file transfers, but her appearance marked the first time the Hollow had bled into public life, and it would not be the last. Later that year. In August 1937, a body was found on the eastern banks of Iron Lick Creek. A young woman, approximately 25. No identification, eyes missing, mouth stitched shut with thread made of coarse animal hair. A small sigil carved beneath her chin, 3 roots spiraling inward. Local papers did not run the story, but in the coroner's notes, under cause of death, one phrase stands out: symbolic silencing, reminiscent of regional spiritual mutilation. Rites. A week later, that coroner, Dr. Samuel Croft, withdrew from practice and left the state. His parting statement to a local journalist was cryptic. "I recorded what I saw. They told me to change the language. I would not, so I left." The body was buried in an unmarked grave. No further autopsy conducted, but her estimated age would place her in the same generation as the Harrell woman listed in the malformed birth notice from 1936, the same one who claimed her child was not hers, just kept in her for a time. Coincidence does not echo like this. And then came the fire. In November 1937, the Ironlick Chapel, long abandoned by mainstream congregants, but still used for night prayer gatherings, according to whispers, went up in flames. The blaze was silent. No one called it in. A hunter named Jasper Griggs witnessed it from the tree line and later testified. No smoke, just light, a low red light, pulsing like a heartbeat. It didn't roar, it hummed. Firemen arrived the next morning to find the building already cold. No cinders, no coals, the pulpit intact. But the cradle, the scrolls, the swaddling bundles beneath the trapdoor, all gone. Only one thing remained, carved into the charred floorboards with a blade. The child cannot be unnamed. Officials deemed it arson. No suspects were interviewed. By the end of 1937, the Pike County School Board filed a request to shut down all rural schools within 15 miles of the Burnt Hollow perimeter. Safety concerns was the cited reason, but internal memos obtained decades later show a different motive. Recent psychological disturbances in children traced to proximity with unregulated households, patterns of nonverbal behavior, symbolic, drawing, and insomnia. Teachers reporting fear of unseen watchers. Consider strategic disbandment of surrounding institutions. One memo bears the stamp, closed. No further inquiries. Elsie Greer's reappearance, if that's what it was, occurred only once. Decades later, in 1981, a nurse at the Tazewell County Hospital filed an incident report after treating an elderly woman who had collapsed on the roadside. No ID. Dressed in clothes too thin for the season. When asked her name, she responded, "They let me out because the others wanted to sleep. I kept humming. They said I could go." The nurse described her as childlike in demeanor, but physically aged. When asked for a birthday, she drew the root sigil on the examination table in her own blood. She was transferred to Western State Hospital, died 3 days later. Body unclaimed. Her intake form lists the name she gave at admittance. Elsie Harrell. The paper trail ends there. We don't know if it was the same girl. We don't know if Elsie Greer and Elsie Harrell are the same entity or fragments of a belief system. 2 foreign 4-state records to comprehend. But what we do know is this: 1937 was the year Burnt Hollow stopped being a secret only the soil knew. It became something noticed, something that hummed in schoolhouses and burned without flame, something that returned a girl. Wrong dot. From that point forward, the files thinned, records vanished, names turned to initials, photos faded, and the state, rather than confront what it had witnessed, began a long campaign of omission. Because if you can't explain the child, you erase the school. If you can't trace the body, you burn the church. If you can't verify the ritual, you bury the belief. But belief doesn't die with the people who hold it. It waits sometimes for generations. So if your grandaunt ever warned you not to whistle near a cradle, if there's a woman in your family tree who vanished without a death notice, if someone once told you a story about a child who wasn't supposed to speak until spring, write it below. Let the record begin where theirs was sealed, and subscribe. Because every comment you leave reopens a file they buried under silence. And silence, when broken, has a sound like humming through burnt wood. The hollow kept its silence longer than any outsider expected. For decades, it existed just below the line of notice, too rural for reporters, too fragmented for census takers, too steep for preachers to climb, until one child did something that couldn't be ignored. Her name was Elsie Greer, according to the Pikeville Courier. On February 11th, 1937, a schoolteacher named Eleanor Finch filed an emergency report with the county superintendent. Her letter, yellowed but intact in the county archive, reads as follows. There is a girl in my class. She is 7, but cannot speak, not from defect, but from training. She stares through the window every hour, draws the same shape over and over, a triangle with roots coming out from the bottom. I have tried to engage her, but today she told me, very calmly, I was not supposed to speak yet. The naming was not done right. The girl, Elsie, was registered without a birth certificate. No vaccination records, no prior school history. Her guardian's name on the enrollment form was simply Sarah H. No address, no phone number, just a scrawled note. We will collect her after planting. Finch's report triggered concern. The board responded with a request for home visitation. But when the county sent 2 workers up the old mining trail near Burnt Hollow, they returned empty-handed. No house, no woman, no sign of a girl ever living there. But the child came to school every morning. She never arrived by road. No one saw her walk in. She would be at her desk, silent, staring. Then one day, she was gone. On March 2nd, 1937, Eleanor Finch entered the schoolhouse early and found a small bundle on the front steps, a strip of flannel cloth, folded like a swaddle, inside, a child's drawing. Crude, but unmistakable. It was a house, but not like any house, Finch knew. The windows were blacked out. The chimney curved unnaturally, like a spine. A single figure stood in front. No face, just a triangle drawn over the head. Beneath the figure, a line written in shaky cursive. I came back wrong. They put me back. Eleanor turned the drawing over and found one of Elsie's baby, teeth taped to the back with pine sap. The schoolhouse shuttered that week. The official explanation, weather damage to the roof, but Eleanor's resignation letter, kept in the personal collection of her surviving niece, tells a different story. It wasn't the roof. It was the humming, the kind that fills a room when something ancient moves. I believe the girl was not alone in herself. I believe her words were not hers. Elsie Greer's name was never officially recorded in the district. The drawing, the tooth, the cloth, all vanished in later file transfers, but her appearance marked the first time the hollow had bled into public life, and it would not be the last dot later that year. In August 1937, a body was found on the eastern banks of Iron Lick Creek. A young woman, approximately 25. No identification, eyes missing. Mouth stitched shut with thread made of coarse animal hair. A small sigil carved beneath her chin. 3 roots, spiraling inward. Local papers did not run the story, but in the coroner's notes, under cause of death, one phrase stands out. symbolic silencing, reminiscent of regional spiritual mutilation. Rites. A week later, that coroner, Dr. Samuel Croft, withdrew from practice and left the state. His parting statement to a local journalist was cryptic. "I recorded what I saw. They told me to change the language. I would not, so I left." The body was buried in an unmarked grave. No further autopsy conducted, but her estimated age would place her in the same generation as the Harrell woman listed in the malformed birth notice. From 1936, the same one who claimed her child was not hers, just kept in her for a time. Coincidence does not echo like this. And then came the fire. In November 1937, the Iron Lick Chapel, long abandoned by mainstream congregants, but still used for night prayer gatherings, according to whispers, went up in flames. The blaze was silent. No one called it in. A hunter named Jasper Griggs witnessed it from the tree line and later testified, "No smoke, just light. A low red light, pulsing like a heartbeat. It didn't roar, it hummed." Firemen arrived the next morning to find the building already cold. No cinders, no coals. The pulpit intact. But the cradle, the scrolls, the swaddling bundles beneath the trapdoor, all gone. Only one thing remained, carved into the charred floorboards with a blade. The child cannot be unnamed. Officials deemed it arson. No suspects were interviewed by the end of 1937. The Pike County School Board filed a request to shut down all rural schools within 15 miles of the Burnt Hollow perimeter. Safety concerns was the cited reason, but internal memos obtained decades later show a different motive. Recent psychological disturbances in children traced to proximity with unregulated households. Patterns of nonverbal behavior, symbolic, drawing, and insomnia. Teachers reporting fear of unseen watchers. Consider strategic disbandment of surrounding institutions. One memo bears the stamp, "Closed." No further inquiries. Elsie Greer's reappearance, if that's what it was, occurred only once. Decades later, in 1981, a nurse at the Tazewell County Hospital filed an incident report after treating an elderly woman who had collapsed on the roadside. No ID. Dressed in clothes too thin for the season. When asked her name, she responded, "They let me out because the others wanted to sleep. I kept humming. They said I could go." The nurse described her as childlike in demeanor, but physically aged. When asked for a birthday, she drew the root sigil on the examination table in her own blood. She was transferred to Western State Hospital. Died 3 days later. Body unclaimed. Her intake form lists the name she gave at admittance, Elsie Harrell. The paper trail ends there. We don't know if it was the same girl. We don't know if Elsie Greer and Elsie Harrell are the same entity or fragments of a belief system, too foreign for state records to comprehend. But what we do know is this: 1937 was the year Burnt Hollow stopped being a secret only the soil knew. It became something noticed, something that hummed in schoolhouses and burned without flame, something that returned a girl. Wrong. From that point forward, the files thinned, records vanished, names turned to initials, photos faded, and the state, rather than confront what it had witnessed, began a long campaign of omission. Because if you can't explain the child, you erase the school. If you can't trace the body, you burn the church. If you can't verify the ritual, you bury the belief. But belief doesn't die with the people who hold it. It waits sometimes for generations. So if your great-aunt ever warned you not to whistle near a cradle, If there's a woman in your family tree who vanished without a death notice. If someone once told you a story about a child who wasn't supposed to speak until spring, write it below. Let the record begin where theirs was sealed, and subscribe. Because every comment you leave reopens a file they buried under silence. And silence, when broken, has a sound like humming through burnt wood. On August 4th, 1969, a woman walked barefoot into the McDowell County Sheriff's Office. Her hair was matted. Her arms were wrapped in a quilt stitched from children's nightgowns, faded and stiff with dried milk. She carried nothing, no wallet, no bag, not even shoes. Just a paper tag around her neck, pinned with a safety pin. It read, "Return to soil if found singing." She identified herself as Rosemary Parrish, except there was no Rosemary Parrish in the local birth registry, no social security number, no missing persons report. Just her, silent for the first hour. Then, when offered water, she whispered, "The singing tree has no leaves in winter." The deputy on duty, a young man named Dale Morton, noted that her voice had no musicality, like each word had to be remembered, not spoken. When asked where she had come from, she repeated only one word, cradle. Medical staff transferred her to Tazewell State Hospital for evaluation. Over the following weeks, she wrote nearly 50 pages of what the institution labeled dream logic and delusional architecture. But those pages, now preserved in a private collection at the University Archives in Charleston, hold uncanny consistency. She drew the same image over and over. A woman in profile, hands bound, kneeling before a tree whose roots reached upward, not downward. The sky was always black, the moon always full, and beneath the tree, small figures, curled, faceless, humming in one page, dated August 9th. Rosemary writes, "She watched too long. The root showed her the name early. Her mouth changed. Her hands started to move the way the others did not. She couldn't keep the silence, so they gave her back. When asked by doctors who she was, Rosemary smiled and said, 'One of the Herald girls, born late, named wrong.'" That phrase, "named wrong," appears a dozen times in Rosemary's writings. It is always capitalized. It is always treated as a kind of sentence, not a mistake. A punishment. The staff psychiatrist, Dr. Evelyn Rourke, wrote an internal memo dated September 2nd, 1969. Patient shows no classical signs of schizophrenia, delusion, or paranoia. Exhibits high cognitive function and significant linguistic complexity. Appears, instead, to be operating from a highly structured belief system rooted in fear, ritual, and inherited silence. Rosemary was never violent, never erratic, but she never answered questions directly. She would simply say, "I'm waiting for the hush." She was placed on mild sedation and observed for months. During that time, 3 separate nurses left their posts after claiming they heard music from her room, even though Rosemary never sang, and the room had no radio. One nurse's exit letter included a single line, "It wasn't music for ears, it was music for roots." Eventually, Rosemary stopped speaking. One day, she simply closed her eyes and refused to open them again. She did not sleep. She did not eat. She simply sat upright, perfectly still for 79 hours. When she finally opened her eyes, she whispered one phrase which the night orderly recorded verbatim. "It remembered me, and now it's under my bed." She was transferred to solitary care. Her final written message slipped under her door sometime in December 1969. Was a single sentence scribbled on the back of a hospital meal slip. She wasn't punished for what she did. She was punished for remembering what they made her watch. After that, she vanished. Her chart lists her transfer date as January 4th, 1970. Destination redacted. No transfer vehicle was scheduled that day. No driver signed out the patient. When asked about the discrepancy in 1992, a former hospital records clerk said, "She didn't leave through the door." That's all I can say. That's all we were told to say. But Rosemary Parish wasn't the only one who spoke. In 1983, a graduate student named Benjamin Callum was conducting field work on Appalachian oral tradition. He visited several elderly residents of eastern Kentucky and recorded interviews about forgotten hymns and burial customs. One woman, Edna Macabre, age 91, refused to be recorded, but shared something she said her grandmother warned her of. The heralds didn't bury their dead. They planted them babies too, in swaddles, under stones. Said if they were quiet enough, they'd bloom into something new. Callum noted that Edna drew the same triangle witherroot sigil in the dirt outside her porch without prompting. When asked where she learned it, she looked out at the tree line and whispered, "It came back to me in a fever. The way rot rises." A month later, Callum disappeared while hiking near Burnt Hollow. His tape recorder was found, but the cassette inside had been overwritten with low, rhythmic humming. No voice, just the sound of breath. The field journal in his backpack contained a final note. There's no single witness. Just fragments. People who remember too much and then disappear. There are more. A boy in 1993 who drew a mouth sewn shut on every page of his sketchbook after his grandmother moved into their home. A woman in 2006 who posted on an early message board about cradled dreams, visions of being rocked by something too large, too old, and humming in a voice she knew was hers. The thread was deleted after only 2 replies. One read, "Don't speak the name." It rewrites the silence. Even in the modern era, in the age of internet archives and forensic genealogy, no one has been able to track down a confirmed descendant of the but the witnesses remain, each bearing pieces, each offering just enough for the shape of something older than myth to emerge. And what binds them isn't trauma, it's memory, not memories of childhood, but of something they were told never to say out loud, of names they weren't supposed to know. The witnesses are like seeds in the wind, drifting, rootless, until something calls them back to the soil. Until they remember, because in the language of the hollow, remembering is an act of disobedience, and those who remember must be silenced. So if your family once spoke of a woman who stopped speaking overnight, if someone you knew vanished into a system that claimed not to know their name, if you've ever seen the same image in your dreams, a tree, a cradle, a mouth stitched closed, write it. Tell us what they left out of the records, and subscribe, not for views, not for likes, but because with every comment you leave, the silence gets weaker. And maybe, just maybe, someone still out there is listening, waiting to remember, waiting to be found. Silence doesn't happen by accident. It takes effort to bury stories. It takes hands to burn ledgers, signatures to seal records, and orders from men in high rooms to make entire families disappear from paper, not by violence, but by red tape. And that's exactly what happened in Burnt Hollow. The first recorded suppression effort came not from a preacher, a sheriff, or a local politician, but from a librarian. In 1953, Annette Rowley, a regional archivist for the McDowell County Historical Preservation Committee, filed an unusual request. She asked to reclassify 27 documents from public to restricted, citing inconsistent sourcing and moral incongruity. Among them, the 1937 letter from schoolteacher Eleanor Finch to coroner reports detailing infant death and a partial map showing homestead plots on Burnt Hollow. Ridge labeled only with single initials, SH, LH, RH, RH. Annette wrote, "These documents conflict with known cartography and verified census data. They reflect narratives, unsupported by legal structures, and are not suitable for public dissemination." The board approved her request without debate. 2 months later, the documents vanished during what was described as a filing room incident. No fire, no flood, just gone. The loss was never investigated. That was the first quiet erasure. The next came louder. In 1961, local journalist Mark Linwood published a 4-part investigative series in the Pine Fork Herald titled "The Ridge That Refuses Its Name." The articles explored unregistered births, spiritual rituals involving infant silence and symbolic burial, and the troubling consistency of the root sigil drawn in school notebooks, scratched into pews, carved on barn walls from McDowell to Letcher County. The final installment, scheduled for print on June 7th, never ran. Instead, the paper published a full-page obituary for Linwood. Cause of death, self-inflicted gunshot. But no weapon was recovered. No autopsy made public. His notes were seized by county officials. His wife, interviewed briefly in 1992, said only, "He was writing about something people still fear, something they've agreed not to remember." His death was ruled a suicide. Case closed. The story buried with him, but not completely, because 5 years later, in 1966, an anonymous letter arrived at the West Virginia State Archives. It was typewritten, no signature, postmarked from McDowell County. The sheriff's office knows. So does the church. So did the school board. There were names they refused to write, addresses they refused to visit, and hymns they made children forget. Look for what's not there. Look for the missing forms, the initials, the redacted boxes. The fires weren't accidents. They were cleanings. Enclosed was a single photograph, a page from an old school roster. Every student had a surname except one, first name, Rona, no address, no grade, just a symbol next to her name, the root triangle inked in red. This wasn't neglect. This was strategy, and it ran deep. In 1974, after a formal Freedom of Information request was filed by folklorist Dana Mallory, the West Virginia Department of Social Services declassified several documents related to rural child welfare irregularities. One internal memo, dated 1968, from Chief Investigator Thomas Veal, states, "Several reported incidents of ritualized neglect have been traced to isolated communities between McDowell and Harlan. Requests to pursue further investigation have been met with strong resistance from local law enforcement, who cite insufficient cause and historical folklore as grounds for dismissal." A follow-up note, typed in the margins, reads, "No one wants another Pine Fork incident." But perhaps the most damning evidence of deliberate suppression came from a court case. Buried in the back of a 1983 Family Services docket, case number 83CV219, in re. Guardianship of minor child name withheld, filed in Pike County. The petition was made by a woman claiming to have rescued a child from the cradle house in Burnt Hollow. The woman, name redacted, said the child had no birth certificate, no vaccinations, no record of existence. The court dismissed the case. Why? Because according to the official ruling, the child did not exist. The judge's notes include a single handwritten comment, "No Harrell lineage acknowledged by this court. Further pursuit discouraged." That phrase, "further pursuit discouraged," would appear again in 1991. In a letter sent to an academic researcher from the Kentucky Bureau of Vital Statistics, the researcher, Gregory Seil, had requested information on burial customs among unincorporated families in eastern Kentucky. His inquiry mentioned a silent lineage and the recurrence of ash-dyed clothing and symbolic teeth offerings. The response: no records match your inquiry. These claims are folkloric in nature. We advise discontinuing further research. In this area, Gregory's paper was never published. His notes were donated to a university library, now restricted, who has the power to make a state archive turn folklore into forbidden material, who has the interest to redact birth records, to silence midwives, to erase children who once sat in public school chairs. You could say it was just small-town fear. You could say the hollow scared people into forgetting, but the paper trail, or more importantly, the holes in it, suggests something more: a coordinated absence, an institutional choice to leave a blank space where a family once was, not a denial, a pact. Ask enough questions in McDowell County and people will tell you the same thing. You don't talk about the ones who don't bury their own. Ask again and they'll say, we were told not to speak the name, not for fear, for respect. The town silenced itself. Then the state helped it stay that way, and to this day there are families who pass stories around kitchen tables of babies who couldn't be named, of girls who came home humming songs no one had taught them, of lineages they were told to forget. They don't show up in books. They don't get Facebook pages. They don't leave graves with names, but they are remembered in whispers, in sighs before a door is closed, in the eyes of someone who hears a hum in the woods and refuses to turn toward it. This wasn't just an effort to hide the hair elves. It was an agreement between fear, faith, and the institutions, too weak to confront either. So, if your grandfather ever burned a family Bible without telling you why, if your mother refused to talk about an aunt who wasn't like the others, if there's a redacted name in your genealogy report, or if the system says a child in your line never existed, tell us, write it below and subscribe. Because every story you remember loosens another knot they tied in silence. And what they couldn't destroy, they tried to forget. They say it's still there. Not a house in the modern sense, no mailbox, no electricity, no siding to rot off, and no porch swing to creak in the breeze. What remains on Burnt Hollow Ridge is older than that. A skeleton of what might have once been a dwelling, or a monument, or a warning. No one can agree on the path that leads to it, because the path moves, but every few years someone finds it, and every time something different is left behind. In 1987, two college students, Naomi Collister and Drew Phelps, were hiking near Iron Lick when they came across a stone foundation built into the hillside. No roof, no door, just for low walls and a sagging hearth that smelled like milk gone sour. Inside the hearth, they found a child's bracelet, rusted, with the letters RH etched into it. Tucked in the chimney flue was a piece of paper so aged it broke at the edges when touched. It was the last page of a diary. The black-veined twins have stopped crying. The others have started to hum again. I buried the tongue. I hope that's enough, they told a ranger who dismissed it as old settler ruins. But Drew never returned to campus. His body was found 3 weeks later at the base of a ravine. Barefoot, eyes open, no trauma to the body. Naomi withdrew from school when reached years. Later, she said only, the house moved after he went in. It wasn't there anymore. But the humming was In 1999, an amateur ghost hunting group from Knoxville filmed a camcorder walkthrough of the same area. The footage still archived on a paranormal forum under the title, "The House That Knows," shows 5 people entering a clearing. You see the remains of stone, the corner of a hearth, then a faint melody, like someone exhaling through a reed. Then silence. One of the members, seen clearly in the video, steps into the frame, then falls abruptly to the ground. When the others reach her, she's unresponsive. Her mouth is open, as if screaming, but no sound emerges. Her hands are clasped over her ears. The tape ends with the camera panning up into the tree canopy, then cutting to black dot. She later claimed, "It wasn't that I heard something, it was that something heard me." In 2006, a man named Jasper Leland claimed to have spent a night in the Hollow House. He posted a detailed blog entry describing a square room with ash-covered windows, a cradle nailed to the floor, and a set of infant shoes dangling from the rafters by their laces. He described a humming that seemed to come from beneath the room, like an underground choir breathing in rhythm. Jasper's blog was taken down days later. His next and final post read, "You can't stay in the house unless it chooses you. I think it's still deciding what I am." And then, nothing. But the strangest report came in 2017. Tamed maintenance crew for the Appalachian Wireless Communications Company was surveying land near Burnt Hollow for a potential cell tower. GPS failed. Radio failed. One worker, Maria Santos, claimed she saw what looked like a cabin intact, with smoke coming from the chimney, even though her co-workers saw only trees. She described it in detail. The wood was black, like it had burned and grown back. There was a baby's bonnet on the front step, and a line of stones circling the foundation. Each one had a single tooth on top, dry, perfectly white. She approached, but her partner stopped her. When she turned to argue, the house was gone. Later, in a written statement, she said, "It didn't disappear. I think I stopped being allowed to see it." Since then, at least for Reddit threads and dozens of private Facebook group posts have mentioned a house near Burnt Hollow that moves when you're not looking. One user claimed their father went missing for 3 days and returned with no memory except for the phrase, "Cradle's still there, still rocking, no wind." Another posted a hand-drawn map, passed down through generations, with a warning scrawled across the top. "You'll know the house by the silence around it. If the birds stop, turn back." What's terrifying isn't just that people keep finding this house. It's that the house seems to keep choosing them, because the patterns are never random. They're always drawn to the same spot, somewhere near parcel number 119B on Burnt Hollow Ridge, the last known location linked to the Harrell family, the same land that paid taxes in 1927, the same initials, RH, the same cradle. The structure isn't protected. It's not on any registry. It has no fencing, no signage, but it's not unguarded, because something in that clearing watches, not with eyes, but with memory. The house remembers who was born wrong. The house remembers who named too early. The house remembers who buried what should have been returned. In Appalachian folklore, there's a story about houses that aren't built, but grow. Born from the soil, fed by belief, anchored by silence. You don't find them by accident. They recognize you. And if you stay too long, they decide where you belong in the story, inside or beneath, to this day. Residents from surrounding counties refuse to hike the ridge. Hunters avoid the trail past Iron Lick. A local pastor, when asked to bless the site for a documentary crew, reportedly said, You don't bless a wound. You let it scab. You don't pick at it. Because the house isn't haunted. It's not cursed. It's not evil. It is obligated. Obligated to continue what the heralds started. Obligated to cradle what was never named. Obligated to remember what the rest of the world chose to forget. And it does remember. Because every few years, someone finds it. And every few years, someone doesn't come back. So if you've ever seen a house where no house should be, if you've stood in the woods and heard a lullaby with no words, if you've dreamed of rafters lined with teeth, or cradles that rock without wind, tell us, write it below and subscribe, because every story you share is another stone the house has to carry. And maybe, one day, it will be too full to cradle anything else. The Harolds were not the only ones. That's the horror that comes next. Not the isolation of Burnt Hollow, but the revelation that the practices found there weren't isolated at all. You can trace it in the school rosters. In 1924, a class photo from a one-room schoolhouse in Buchanan County, Virginia shows 23 children lined up in front of a clapboard building. 3 of them were identical pendants, tiny brass triangles on twine. The same 3 have white markings behind their ears, faint but visible if you look close. Not dirt, not injury, markings, a symbol. 3 downward roots spiraling inward. The teacher's journal, still held in the county museum, mentions a strange illness that affected just those 3. Nosebleeds that wouldn't clot. Night terrors that made them sleepwalk toward the woods. All 3 children withdrew from school by spring. The last line of her journal entry reads, "Their mothers said they weren't named yet, that we shouldn't be teaching silence breakers. These weren't Harolds. Their names were color. Marek Bledsoe in Letcher County, Kentucky." Birth records from 1932 to 1939 show a cluster of unregistered home births, all within a set radius and all attended by the same undocumented midwife, initials SG. The babies were not issued surnames for their first 6 months. In fact, in 4 cases, birth certificates were never filed at all, only delayed death notices submitted years later, citing failure to thrive or ritual complications. One such record, from 1935, notes the following under other conditions: infant never cried. Mother reports child heard the hum too early. Across the state line. In Pike County, local churches kept quiet logbooks of community concerns, handwritten records that never made it into public complaint systems. A 1941 entry from Pastor Lowell Mercer of First Mission reads, "Sister Adeline. Holloway reports, a neighbor family keeps their boy in the root room past the naming season. Boy is 8, still mute, wears no shoes. Marks his arms with soot each. Sunday morning before sunup. Again, not Harold. Holloway. A different family, a different ridge. The same signs, the deeper you dig. The more you find the same strange traits repeating like a curse passed through unfamiliar. Bloodlines, children born in silence. Naming withheld, symbolic. Marks behind the ear or beneath the tongue. Teeth stored in jars or hidden in walls. Drawings of the triangle with root sigil long before outside documentation ever reached these hollows. In 1955, a child named Naomi Bledsoe, age 10, was committed to the Western State Hospital after attempting to bury her newborn brother alive. When questioned, she said, "He cried before the 3rd son. That means the root doesn't want him." Her file was sealed. The family moved to Missouri. But a local nurse at the hospital, who kept an unofficial journal, noted, Naomi spoke of the cradle choir and the breathing house, said she'd been taught the hush since before she was born. Even more chilling is what links these families through time. Repetition, not just of ritual, but of names. The name Rona appears in 5 separate child protection reports between 1923 and 2008, different counties. Same spelling, same oddities, late speech development, ritualistic drawing, an aversion to mirrors. In each case, a family member claimed the child was named too early or came back from the hush wrong. In one instance, a Rona, age 6, was found wandering alone near an abandoned church in 1967. When questioned, she said she was trying to find her root again. She was placed in foster care. Within a year, she disappeared from the system. The foster parents were interviewed briefly before moving out of state. The only quote preserved from the file, "She wasn't in the house when we woke up, but all the baby teeth were gone from the keepsake box. Every single one." Folklore scholars who've studied Appalachian burial customs note that the practice of keeping teeth, especially baby teeth, is exceedingly rare. But when it appears, it always coincides with stories of naming, rituals, and soul transference. In the 1978 Field Journal of Vernacular Death Rites, researcher Mary Ellen Stroud writes, families from unincorporated hollows occasionally reference milk teeth as soul placeholders. If the name is broken through sound, cry, or misnaming, the teeth must be burned or returned to the root, or the spirit cannot settle. She tracked this belief not only in Harrell-adjacent families, but in colors of Kentucky, of Virginia, and a little-known branch of the Holloway line that relocated to Tennessee in the 1940s, bringing their cradle and their silence with them. The rituals move, the families move, but the patterns, they stay, even into the modern era in 2004. A substitute teacher in southern West Virginia filed a report describing a 5th-grade student who would not respond to roll call. The boy refused to speak, drew spirals over his notebooks, and hummed a tune no one recognized, low and rhythmic, pulsing like breath. When asked his name, he wrote, "I'm not 7 yet." His paperwork listed his last name as Malin, a surname not historically tied to any known Hollow bloodlines. But when his home was visited, officials found no parents, only a grandmother who refused to let anyone inside. Her words to the county social worker, "He won't be named under a roof that doesn't sing back." No charges were filed. The file was marked resolved. In reality, it was forgotten, because no one wanted to face what it suggested, that whatever had started in burnt Hollow hadn't stopped. It had spread, it had adapted, through marriage, through silence, through rural lines of inheritance and oral memory, and places where faith runs deeper than law. To this day, scattered across the hollows of Kentucky, Virginia, and West Virginia, there are families who still won't speak of their own dead, not out of grief, out of reverence, or fear they pass down songs with no lyrics. They hold ceremonies with no guests. They keep cradles in root cellars, and if you ask them why, they'll say, "It's how we keep the hush." So if your family ever changed its name when it moved counties, if your ancestry test came back with more questions than answers, if you once found a box of baby teeth in a crawl space and didn't ask why, write it below, because maybe it wasn't just the maybe this wasn't a single cursed bloodline. Maybe it was a belief buried like a seed, and all it took was a little silence for it to grow roots in someone else's name. And subscribe, because each story you share is another line in the pattern, and once you see the pattern, you can never unsee it. It was always going to return, not because of some ancient curse, or blood magic, or backwoods superstition, but because silence does not end a story, it just delays its echo. And in these hollows, the echo always finds its way home. The signs started quietly in 2019. A kindergarten teacher in Letcher County submitted an incident report to the school board. One of her students, a 5-year-old boy named Caleb M., had begun humming during nap time. The tune was low, repetitive, and unfamiliar. When she asked where he'd learned it, Caleb replied, "Mama sings it in the black room when we don't sleep fast enough." She pressed him gently. "What black room? Where?" Caleb looked confused. "The one under the floor, the hush room." The report was never followed up. The teacher took early retirement later that year. Her public statement said she needed distance from certain stories. Her private diary, later leaked by a family member, includes a single line scrawled across the inside cover, "They've started naming wrong again." In 2021, a school counselor in McDowell County began noticing a pattern in children's artwork. It wasn't the content that alarmed her. Strange drawings are part of any childhood. It was the consistency. Over 24 students in separate schools drew the same image over a period of 8 months. A tree with 3 roots spiraling into the ground, a cradle suspended from one branch, and a sun with no face. When she brought it up at a county meeting, the room went still. A principal pulled her aside after and said, "Don't start something that doesn't want to end." She transferred districts within the week. But what truly marked the return wasn't the symbols. It was the singing in October of that year. 911 received a call from a woman in Mingo County. She was sobbing, barely coherent. "My daughter's in the yard, humming, but it's not her voice. I swear to God, it's not her voice." By the time responders arrived, the girl was asleep inside, calm, smiling. She had no memory of what happened, but she did say something odd during her wellness check. "Mama gave me back because I used the name out loud. Now the root wants me." Quiet again. The house was searched. Nothing suspicious found until an officer discovered a trapdoor beneath the laundry room. It led to a dirt crawl space. At the center, a hand-carved wooden cradle. Inside, perfectly arranged, were 17 baby teeth. The case never made the news. No charges filed. The officer who found the cradle left the force 3 months later. He told a local reporter off the record, it was the smell, not death, not rot. It smelled like something that used to be a child. In early 2023, a woman posted anonymously in a private Facebook group for Appalachian family historians. Her message read, "Has anyone heard of naming after 7 years? My grandmother refused to call me anything but child until my 7th birthday. Said the root had to accept me first. I thought it was just weird old tradition, but my daughter started humming in her sleep. Same tune my grandmother used to sing to the firewood. I'm scared." The post was taken down within hours. No one could reach her afterward. Her profile was deleted, but a screenshot circulated with the final comment she left on the thread. "I think it's waking up again. So why now? Why is it returning?" Some point to the disconnection of modern life, how families no longer pass down oral stories, how churches no longer hold sway, how people are adrift from their roots, both literal and metaphorical. That void leaves space for old structures to resurface, space for rituals to return as instinct, space for the hush. Others think the silence never left, that the rituals were passed down quietly, not through ceremony, but through behavior, that the root system beneath these hills never died, just went dormant, waiting for a new generation to forget enough that it could take root again. And then there are those who believe the names are the key, that certain names, like Rona, Elsie, Sarah, don't belong to people at all. They belong to the root, and once they're spoken aloud again, the root begins to remember. And when the root remembers, it reaches. There's a thread on Reddit, buried under layers of folklore and creepypasta, that compiles reports from people who've dreamed of cradles rocking in empty rooms. They don't know why, they just feel it. One user claimed, "I heard someone whisper, 'Don't name the crying one' in my dream. I don't even have kids." Another replied, "My brother's son drew a triangle with roots and said it was his before name. I never taught him that." People are seeing the same sigils, hearing the same hums, drawing the same cradles, but this time they don't live on remote ridges. They live in suburbs, in towns, in homes, with Wi-Fi and smart doorbells and DNA test kits that still somehow fail to account for one side of their lineage. This time, it's not isolated, it's everywhere, because the hollow wasn't just a place, it was a pattern, a way of being, a belief that children are not named, they are claimed, that silence isn't empty, it's formative, that if a name is spoken too soon, it doesn't stick to the child, it sticks to something else, something older. And now, the echoes are returning in modern forms, in school incidents, in art, in sleep, in stories that were never told aloud, but passed through something deeper. So if your child has started drawing roots with no explanation, if your niece hums lullabies no one taught her, if your family history has a gap, a missing surname, or a cradle that's always been in the attic for sentimental reasons, write it below, because this isn't just a story anymore, it's an unfolding. And subscribe, not because you want to hear more, but because maybe, just maybe, you already know the next part, and the root is waiting for you to remember. Some names are forgotten, others are removed, but a few, a very few, erase the one who speaks them. The name is Rona Harrell. It first appeared in 1933, handwritten in cursive at the bottom of a McDowell County incident report. The report itself is minimal: female child found near creek bed. No known residence. Draws symbols in soot. Will not respond to verbal inquiry. Under name, a deputy wrote Rona Harrell. The question mark circled twice. That same name with the same handwriting reappears in a 1966 missing persons file in Buchanan County. Witness, Rona Harrell, gave no date of birth, stated she came back before her name was ready. Signature on file. Experts reviewing the case decades later noted something strange. The 1966 signature is identical to the 1933 cursive. Same slope, same angle, same unusual swirl in the capital R. Handwriting analysts use the term script twins to describe coincidences. But this wasn't similar. This was exact. As if the same hand signed both, over 30 years apart. The third appearance comes in 1981, in a social services file from Kentucky. Child listed as Rona removed from home. Subject claimed she had been named already, before this body. Caseworker noted dissociative tendencies. Again, no last name given, but the intake notes assigned a Harrell at the bottom of the page, as if the caseworker and the subject shared the same name. except the caseworker had no record, no employment file. The handwriting matches the 1966 and 1933 samples, the same hand, the same loop in the R, the same presence. Across 5 decades, by the early 2000s, the pattern had evolved. A FOIA request filed by an independent historian named Marianne Kelter asked for any state documents referencing the Harrell surname between 1900 and 2000. The results: no such surname exists in government files, and yet, in local cemeteries, you'll find graves with that name, usually just one per town, always with incomplete dates. Often no death date, just the name carved into stone. Rona Harrell, beloved daughter, born silent, the name was given to soon who carves that, who writes, born silent, on a grave, who buries a name that keeps rewriting the one who speaks it. In an unpublished paper, folklore scholar Gregory Stein proposes that Rona Harrell is not a single person but a title, a placeholder for someone or something that walks generational lines, a name that attaches to those who've come too close to the root, a name that fills in where memory fails. He references an old oral tradition from eastern Kentucky, the girl who walks behind the name. She can't be spoken without changing. The ledger: you say her once, she appears. You say her twice, she belongs to you. 3 times, and your name becomes hers. In 2008, a police report from Ashe County, North Carolina, included the name Rona Harrell again, this time listed under signature of witness. The witness had filed a complaint about hearing music from beneath the floorboards. Officers who visited the home found nothing unusual, but the woman who filed the report was never seen again. The paper trail dead ends. No forwarding address, no relatives, but the report remains, and so does the signature, same hand, same cursive, our same absence left behind. What is this name? A vessel, a roll, a ripple left behind by something trying to remember itself. Whatever it is, every time it appears, something disappears, alongside it, a person, a record, a town, a child. Archivists have since discovered strange anomalies surrounding any document containing the name. Scans blur, paper goes brittle, files refuse to upload. More than one librarian has noted that the folder makes the computer freeze, or that the search function skips over it, like the system knows. Digital catalogs simply skip her, which begs the question: if the name erases files, if it rewrites documents, if it returns across decades with no aging, no change, no difference, then who is Rona Harrell? Not a woman, not a girl, not a memory, a marker, a sign that something else is at play. That time bends around this name, that bureaucracy erases it not from laziness, but from fear. That people who know the name forget themselves, or become part of it. In 2022, a school district in Virginia reported a glitch in their attendance system. Every 3rd grader in one classroom had their name replaced with Rona_H. IT professionals blamed a virus. But when the students were asked if they knew anyone by that name, one girl, age 8, said, "She's the one who helps rock the cradle. She lives behind the hush." This girl's parents withdrew her from school the next week. No forwarding information. Their number disconnected, but the drawing she left behind in art class remains. A spiral of roots. A name etched again and again in pencil. Rona, 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 Rona Thaz. If the more you write it, the more you lose the hand that holds the pencil. The name doesn't just appear, it consumes, it fills gaps, it moves like soil, like breath, like memory trying to wear skin again, and it leaves behind no proof except what refuses to disappear. So, if you've ever spoken a name and forgotten why it felt familiar, if your ancestry tree includes a blank spot labeled adopted/unknown origin, if your child hums and then says, "Rona was here," in a voice that isn't theirs, write it, let the record hold what the name tries to hollow, and subscribe. Because every name you speak helps write a new page they can't erase. And some names were never yours to say out loud. The last file was opened by mistake in April 2024. A cartographer named Lee Harmon was updating digital terrain data for the Appalachian region when he noticed an unregistered parcel near the McDowell-Harlan line, parcel number 119B, a place that should have been logged decades ago, showed no structures, no ownership, and no tax history post-1950. But satellite data told another story. A faint rectangle, uneven discoloration in the canopy, a break in the earth where roots should have been, a shape too symmetrical to be natural. When Harmon zoomed in, the image briefly corrupted. The parcel vanished, then reappeared again. Only this time, the surrounding parcels had shifted, as if the hollow didn't want to be mapped or had moved. Harmon submitted a report to the state mapping authority. He never received a response. 3 days later, his laptop bricked. His external drive, the one holding the raw map tiles, failed during a backup. The only file that remained was a single image titled cradle_eyes_open.jpg. What it shows is unclear. Some see a crib, some see a mouth. Some say it's a hollow, dark and waiting. It was the last thing he posted before deleting his social media accounts. And with that, the record closed again. Not by law, not by force, but by design. Because this story, the Harrels, the hollow, the hush, was never supposed to be remembered. It wasn't a secret kept through violence. It was kept through agreement, a quiet pact across counties, families, and generations. Don't ask, don't speak, don't name. The midwives stopped recording births, the churches stopped ringing their bells, the schools closed their rural branches, the census stopped walking up those hills, and the people, the ones who'd heard the humming, who'd buried teeth under floorboards, who'd named their children too early and paid the price, they remembered in silence. And the rest of us, we grew up never knowing we were missing something. But the hollow remembers, because you can't kill a root. You can only cut it back. You can only pretend the soil forgot what it held, and now the memory is returning. Every file you just heard, real or not, follows a shape, a ritual, a cradle turned upside down, a lullaby with no words, a name that erases the speaker, a house that waits not to be found, but to remember who once lived inside it. We've spent this entire documentary trying to uncover the Harrels, but maybe there never were any Harrels. Maybe there were just echoes. Maybe what we've been chasing isn't a family, but a wound, and maybe we weren't meant to look at it, not because it's evil, but because it's unfinished. It still hums, it still names, it still waits for silence to break. So this is the part where we stop, where we let the dirt settle again, if only for a while, where we close the file not because it's complete, but because it's full, too full to carry more names, too full to hold another cradle. But before we close it for good, ask yourself, why are the birds still silent near Burnt Hollow? Why? Does every census fail just one house? Why do children across 3 states still draw a tree with 3 roots? Why do people forget their name right after they say Rona? And why, even now, do you feel like something is watching you? Because maybe, just maybe, the root knows you listened. So if this story echoed something your family never talks about, if your grandmother warned you not to speak a name before the 7th birthday, if your dreams include a cradle, a hum, or teeth where they shouldn't, write it below. Tell us what they buried. Tell us what the records won't. And subscribe, not to hear more, but to seal this file with us. Because even this video might disappear tomorrow, and if it does, you'll know why. Because silence feeds the root, and some names were never meant to stay buried.